I just wanted to talk about your father.
Okay.
Who was your father?
My father, his family came over from Italy. They lived in the Apennine Mountains, a little village called Pietraferrero, and they came over in their early 20s. My father was born in 1925, August 16th, and he was young. He was the youngest of the three brothers, and he had two sisters as well. And the brothers were Pete, Victor, and the sisters were Rosie and Genevieve. And they lived in his father was a pretty tough guy. He was a landscaper. And when the war started, my dad dropped out of school and went into the Navy. And if you recall, Navy at that time, there wasn't a lot of, let's say, traditional Navy sailors. It was mostly reservists in World War II. A lot of people don't realize that, but if you look at a lot of their honorable discharges, it says USNR. A lot of them were reservists. And he went in 1943, and he was overseas in 1944, and he was part of Operation Dragoon. And my father was on LCIs, Landing Craft Infantry, and he was on US 675. And that's the ship that has the two ramps that come down in the front, and the soldiers would go off. And normally there was a complement of about 180 soldiers and maybe eight to 10 officers in that particular ship that when they disembarked. The one story that really caught my attention, I asked him, what was it like, what was it like on a ship when the soldiers disembarked? Well, at Operation Dragoon was 2 months after D-Day. Operation Dragoon went August 15th, 1944. A lot of people don't talk about Operation Dragoon. Matter of fact, every book I look at, they just have a little synopsis about it. They really didn't go into detail about it. Operation Dragoon was an operation between the French and the United States. There was a coalition there of Navy vessels and soldiers in that particular invasion. And let me go.
Was that France?
Yeah, southern France. Yeah, they went in southern France, excuse me. And here's the thing about that. Eisenhower wanted to squeeze France from the north and the south, but they didn't have enough amphibious craft to do that. So naturally, they went in on D-Day, June 6th, and then 2 months later, they moved the amphibious force to the south, and they went in on southern France, August 15th. He said he felt so bad. Now, you have to understand, most of the guys on his LCI were just young guys, too. They were 17, 18, 19 years old. And he said he'll never forget the smell that came from the men that were disembarking. Now, you have to remember, these guys knew about D-Day. They knew about Omaha Beach. They knew about Utah Beach and how the men were, slaughtered as they were coming off the Higgins boats. So they were prepared for that. And a lot of them, he said he felt so bad. He said these poor men were puking and urinating on themselves, and it was just horrible. And he said, I'll never forget that smell. And on that invasion, there were one unit and one man, okay? And the man was the most decorated soldier of World War II, and that was Audie Murphy, was on Operation Dragoon. He was from the 36th National Guard out of Texas. But when he got there, he was in the 3rd Division over there. And then, but Audie Murphy, the most decorated man, and the most decorated unit was the 442nd, which was the all-Japanese American unit. Now, you have to understand, these guys, their parents and their family were in internment camps here in the United States during that time, and they were there fighting for the United States. And they were the most decorated unit, and they took it on the chin many times. I mean, they lost a lot of men, but they were that was the most decorated unit. The other story, my dad, this is a sort of a little funny story in a way. He was a 20 millimeter anti-aircraft gunner on the bow of the ship. And I asked him, I said, as a kid, I said, Dad, did you ever shoot any planes down? He said, well, this is how it went. He said, I had a bucket around my neck. The seas were high. I'm puking my guts out. I'm pulling the trigger, and they're just wheeling me around. He said, there were so many tracers in the sky, you didn't know who the heck was whose. But he said, I just fired away. He said, I probably hit nothing. He said, but I was firing away. He said, and that's the only two stories that my father, he passed away at age 49. So I really didn't have a chance to third degree him on his other, adventures. But he ended up in the Pacific. So he was in both theaters of operation, the European theater and the Pacific theater. And but he was we have pictures of him here in a museum of him on the gun and a lot of his shipmates in his ship and so on. But that's about all I could talk to you about the war. But he was it's like most guys that came back, they just didn't talk about it. And if he would have probably lived to be 80 or 90 years old, he might have opened up a little more. Because here at the museum, as you know, we have a lot of World War II veterans, and a lot of wives say he don't talk about it. But when they come here to the museum, they sort of open up to us and tell us their stories, and which we appreciate.
Well, it's therapeutic.
Yeah, and it gives us an insight on how they made it through that, because these guys were just young men. I mean, like I said, 17, 18, 19 years old, and they're only about 125 to 145 soaking wet. They weren't big men. We have uniforms in here that I don't know who in the heck wore them, but they weren't big. They weren't pretty big. They weren't big men at the time. But that's about the story of that.
Let me get a little bit more on Dragoon. So was this before Audie Murphy became so decorated?
Yes. He ended up in Patton's Third Army. Okay. If Patton came around to Cherbourg, when he came down, they made him go west, and he went west of Cherbourg. Then he's looped around again. As they were coming, Omar Bradley screwed the pooch there and left an opening for the Germans to escape. Patton wanted to close that off. Well, as they were coming up, the Dragoon came 2 months later, and here comes Dragoon, and all these men came up from the south, and a lot of them went into Patton's Third Army. And then naturally the 3rd Division. And the 3rd Division is a patch with white and blue diagonal stripes, honestly.
So was it like D-Day? I mean, what was
here's what I've read about it, as much as I read about it. And I read it in so many different books. Every time I'm at Barnes & Noble, I'm always looking about Operation Dragoon, which there's little. But, yes, there was less resistance, okay, at Operation Dragoon. And that's why it really didn't make the D-Day extravaganza type of thing, you know what I mean? Yeah. The death and the carnage in D-Day was just horrible at Omaha. And but these guys went in a lot of, don't get me wrong, Germans did have defenses there, but it wasn't as, the guns were not as dense. There wasn't so many. They were more further apart and so on. But a lot of men did perish in Operation Dragoon at the beaches.
Yeah, they still got shot at.
Yeah, they still got shot at.
Absolutely.
But a lot of them, and that's why it just, it was never really, the press didn't pick up on it or not too much people took the time to really talk about Operation Dragoon.
Absolutely. And then another question I had about that is, so it happened 2 months after D-Day?
Yes.
So all these guys knew that.
Yes.
So the cat was kind of out of the bag.
And they were, these guys were, let's face it, they were scared. They were very, very scared. Come on. They knew what happened at D-Day. They knew. Thousands of men were killed on D-Day in the first few hours, and they thought that's what was going to happen here on this landing, but it wasn't as intense. Naturally, the Atlantic Wall up on top, they were fortified all the way from Finland all the way around Denmark down into Belgium, France. They had the so. Absolutely. And that's why and then it just upsets me that I can never get any more information about that. What divisions of the French, they don't talk about that. I want to get into that part of it too. What part did France play in that invasion? What part did the United States play in? And how many of the ships were United States ships? How many were French ships? It doesn't tell you that, because a lot of it was landing crafts. Landing craft and LSTs too. You had a lot of those. Now I don't know whether the thing of it is, I don't know whether the LSTs at D-Day came around through Gibraltar, into the Med for this invasion. Now there might have been some of those ships. Now I think US 675 was at D-Day, but my dad wasn't at D-Day. He was at Operation Dragoon, and his ship has one battle star. So matter of fact, his ship was not at D-Day because he only got one battle star on his ribbon. Okay, so that would be the Operation Dragoon. They were not at D-Day.
Absolutely.
So
does that make them any less brave?
No. Oh no. These men were just as brave. The most decorated man, the most decorated unit. These guys were brave. It was very frightening for them. Let's put it that way. When they hit the beaches, they didn't know what to expect. They expected the same thing that happened at D-Day. And a lot of these men ended up, like I said, in Patton's army, and
they still had a very long job.
Yeah, they had generals. Don't get me wrong. There was generals in charge of the divisions and so on and so forth. But still, a lot of these guys ended up in Patton's army. And if you saw it, how Patton came around in southern France here, they were coming across central France, and here comes Operation Dragoon and all their men sweeping up towards the Rhine, And but that's how that went. But the thing of it is, I think all these boys were very brave. Just to put on a uniform and go to battle. A lot of them didn't know whether they were coming home or not. And that's why a lot of World War II guys always had tattoos. What the heck, My dad had a tattoo on his shoulder. He had one on his arm here and one on his shoulder. Through the years, it faded, but they were there, And they were just like any other young man. They had the same wants and needs as every other guy, And but my dad met two of his buddies from Coriopolis, Pennsylvania. That's where he was from, right outside of Pittsburgh, down the Ohio River, about 5 miles down the Ohio River. And two of his, we have a picture in the Pittsburgh Press here in the museum of him and his two buddies that met in Italy during this time frame, and they have the picture of them. And my dad's and my dad's name was Amato Casciato. His middle name was Dominic.
That's a good American name.
Yeah, Amato Dominic Casciato. Yep. But anyway, go ahead.
The other thing I want to know is why is it so important to you in honor of your father, of course, but for this museum to create something like this?
Well, Ken, that you and Tom, Bugala, and so many other veterans here, they think that this history needs to be taught. It needs to never, ever be forgotten. For, like I said, a country who forgets its defenders in itself will be forgotten. So we have to constantly remind people of the sacrifices and their courage and what they did in order to keep our democracy the way it is today, free. and it's an envy of the world. United States, the envy of the world. Let's face it. Dreams are made here in the United States. A lot of dreams are made here, and this history that we provide here in this museum, hopefully, will go on for many, many more years. And the thing that really bothers me the most is the fact that we get a lot of young people in here that really don't understand the sacrifices that the men and women went through during this war, and all the wars that we fought in. We fought against, communism and socialism and fascism and Nazism. We fought against all that stuff. And it's important for us to remember that the sacrifices of our men and women, I don't want them to go in vain. I don't want their lives to be in vain, especially the one. I mean, we lost over 500,000 men and women in World War II. That's a lot of human beings. We lost 58,000 in Vietnam. We lost, tens of thousands in Korea. World War I, we lost 52,000 men killed in action. 63,000 men were killed by disease and other causes. I mean, that's a lot of sacrifice, and we're not even talking about the war on terror. I mean, we lost a lot of good men and women in the war on terror, and I don't want that to be forgotten. It was something that I thought that was necessary to teach, and necessary for people of all ages to understand the sacrifices. And this museum, like we all know, is just not a museum with stuff in it. We do a lot of things to help veterans, just through movie nights and lectures and special events we have for D-Day and Pearl Harbor Day and so on. We constantly, and it's free to come in this museum. We want veterans to come in, not one time. We want them to keep coming back, and to talk to other veterans to help them out. We have a lot of PTSD, veterans that come here, and if it wasn't for the virus, we would have had a PTSD group,
Absolutely, but that brings up another point, is that, it's not just stuff. Like with your father's stuff, you have pictures, you have medals. Each thing tells a story.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
And let me tell you, we have so many. It's funny when people come in and the stories some of these veterans tell us. As you know, we have a picture in the Pacific Room of the signing of MacArthur signing the surrender. And there's officers in the background. And in, I think, summer of 17, we had a senior tour here, and one of those men looked at that picture, and he goes, "That's me right there." I mean, he was there at the signing on the Missouri. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, I had one old guy to come in. He comes in real gruffy. He goes, "I was a BAR man in my squad. I haven't seen a BAR since." I said, "Well, sir, this is your day because we have one back here." And, he went back there and he looked at that gun and he's looking at it. 10 minutes, he's just looking at it. And I said, what the heck's going through this guy's mind, because he carried that in combat, one of those weapons. We have, Harold Wellington, one of our great veterans of World War II, was a merchant marine. He talked about, his exploits as a merchant marine going back and forth over the Atlantic. And there's a couple funny stories that he told me, but I won't get into that right now. But anyway, and then we have George Soros. I mean, he was on LST 515, and he was at Slapping Sands. A lot of people, he talked about Slapping Sands, and every time he talks about it, he gets tears in his eyes because of what happened there. That was the prelude. That would happen April 28th of 44. That was a practice run of D-Day. The beaches were similar to the ones in northern France. And we're disembarking these guys, and all of a sudden here comes these German E-boats that came in and slammed torpedoes into three of the LSTs, killing almost 750 men and wounding many, many more. And his ship, US 515, the they were ordered to leave that area, but he his captain defied the order, the skipper, and went in and started picking these men up. Now, you have to understand, now these guys on this LSD were, first time they probably saw dead people, like that. And they're picking them up and putting them in, bringing them on board, picking them up. And what happened was the British didn't get there with the escorts that they needed, and that's what happened.
But you say he gets, when he tells these
Oh,
stories, it's
very emotional.
Tell me about that.
Yeah, he, George is a very special man. He just turned 95, and when he talks about that particular, it's hard for him to even talk about it because he breaks up. Seeing, I imagine that vision in his head, he just can't erase it. He actually sees it. When he talks to us about slapping sands, he's seeing this in his head. And I think that's what makes it so real to him. I mean, the flashbacks he gets from that. And I think that, to carry that with him, I mean, from 44 to 90, he was only what? He carried that 75 years? 75, 76 years? That memory of that particular day? I mean, that don't go away. And so he really has a lot of emotion when it comes to that. I know when he did a little lecture here, he even broke down, and you can understand I can imagine the anguish, that has to play on him. But he's a very special man. And George and Harold were invited down to the World War II Museum down in New Orleans, which Ken Korn and one of his, anchors or whatever, went with us and filmed the whole thing. And it was one of the best trips, I think, that my wife and I and Janice L. and Mike McCarthy and Tom Bugala and Ken was there, naturally, filming it all. And we all went down there, and we were treated by Gary Sinise with everything was free. They picked us up in a stretch limo. All the plane fares were free. The meals were free. The into the museum was free. It was one of the remarkable trips. And George and Harold had such a great time there, just watching those guys talking about some of their ventures in the service.
Like celebrities.
Oh my goodness, they were treated like celebrities. And Gary Sinise's band, the Lieutenant Dan band, some of the members there met us for lunch, and it was really, really nice. And I guess Gary Sinise has taken over for Bob Hope. Ken said that yesterday.
I'm going to send that to him. I said, Gary Sinise took over for Bob Hope.
That's right. I think that would be great. But anyway, George made 52 trips across the Atlantic in that LSD. When he was in France, he took prisoners and wounded back to England, got supplies, brought it back and forth, 52 times. And but that was an unbelievable time for him.
Anything else you want to say about your dad?
Well, my dad was, he was a pretty tough guy. He tough by meaning, he wanted, you had to work. My dad, you had to work. I'll tell you one time, my senior year after football season, he asked me, "Did you get a job yet?" I mean, this is the day after. Okay, did you get a job yet? And I said, not yet. He said, well, I'll tell you, here's how it's going to go. I'm not going to talk to you till you get a job. Well, a month later, I get a job. He hadn't talked to me for a month. Soon as I got the job, I was a soda jerk down at the local drugstore. He started talking to me like nothing happened. And that's the way he was.
That's right. He was teaching you how to be a man.
Yeah, and I worked with him. And he was tough. He was a contractor. He built homes, and I worked with him. And and on Saturday mornings, you instead of going out to the schoolyard, a lot of times, I mean, I played, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times he'd go, okay, let's go. We're pouring concrete today. And the way I would go. And I was hammering nails when I was 8 years old. He'd pop lines on subfloors, and I'd be pounding 8-penny nails back then. This is in the 50s. And in 1956, he was up on a scaffold. And my sister would like to talk about that. Yeah.
That's memories I have.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, well,
Okay.
switch places
Yeah,
now.
very good.
Yeah.
Okay.
He's okay. I'm just like not thinking of what I remember, you know.
Say your name.
Right. Yeah, you better spell your name for me. Your first name, anyway.
Judy.
Yeah, Judy.
Oh, Judy, is it?
Judy.
J-U-D-Y?
J-U-D-Y.
Okay, very
Yeah.
good. All right. And you're the youngest, the oldest?
I'm
Second.
the second of the four of us.
Okay.
Yes.
So where do you guys fit in? So you
He's
guys-
my older brother. It's my older brother. And then it's me, and then my brother Kenny and my sister Regina, she passed.
Okay.
Yes.
Kenny,
And
that's a good name.
yeah, Kenny, that's why I said I'll never forget your name.
Well, that's a good name because I talked to him on the phone and he's like, I was like, man, you sound just like
Yeah.
him.
It's just as hypered. Yes.
Just as hyper.
Yes.
Well, was your dad like that?
Yes, that's where we get it from. But I just want to say first, Ken, that I'm so proud of my brother Emmett for doing this. I didn't know he had this much compassion, but I'm learning now. And I do learn just from talking to him, just from hearing this. And I was so happy to see the museum. I really wanted to come and see that because I hear so much about it. But
Well, what does it feel like to come in here, you bring in your children, and there's your father?
yes,
Everything,
Yes.
medals, pictures, the whole.
Yes.
How
It's-
does that feel?
it's just an unbelievable feeling. And Emmett called and says, Judy, do you have any pictures of Daddy? And I did. And I had a pile of pictures. And then my youngest daughter mailed them to him, and I see them up. And that's such a nice thing to see, I mean, my father wasn't with us long, and I was married at the age of 20, so I was out of the house. But my father was built like a bull and as strong as an ox. He was the typical Italian, V, short, but so strong. And I do remember that. And he owned Melrose Construction Company. And I'm not sure of the year, though, but he was up doing his job. He was with another young kid in 1956, and the scaffolds broke. And my father broke his back. And the boy that fell with him broke both his legs. And we were young at the time, and my mom had to take on a job as a Stanley. You delivered Stanley stuff, and you almost like a Tupperware party type thing. And she'd put us in the back of the van and pack our lunches and would go. And my father was in the hospital for 6 months. And my brother Kenny at the time was so young, and I remember going to the hospital. We couldn't go see my father. We would stay in the lobby. And I remember the first time my dad was up with a walker, and they allowed him to come down to the elevator. And we were there as young kids, and my brother Kenny didn't know my dad. He didn't remember him, and that hurt my dad's feelings. Not that he realized, that he was gone for 6 months, and he was very young, but I do remember that, and it took him a while. Like now you break your back, it's not like that. I mean, he was upside down, face down, laying straight. And so he started all over. But, that's what I remember of him as a contractor. Emmett remembers military and the stories, which I'm glad he does. But I remember the father side of my dad, the always working. And
Well, what he went through had to have shaped the kind of person that he was.
yes.
So when he hurt himself, what was his attitude like?
Well, I think he was sad that my mom had to take over, and he wasn't with us kids. And like I said, we were young, but I think it made him a stronger person when he came out, of the hospital, because he did go back to work.
I have a story about that.
You want to set in now? You want to stay here?
Here it was. My dad was in a walker, but he was cooking, and man, he made some great meals, great
would.
desserts. Oh yeah, he was making. So it worked out pretty good for us. I loved it because he was cooking. But I have a story. My Uncle Pete and my Uncle Victor snuck me up the steps to see my dad.
Oh, I don't remember
Okay,
that.
so I was 9 years old. Yeah, 9. Yeah, I was 9 years old. He stuck me up the steps. Now, back then, there was a lot of nuns in the hospital, okay? And they were very strict about children back then going to the hospital. So they snuck me up the back. My Uncle Victor looked out the door and didn't see anybody, ran me across the hallway to his room. Soon as I got about 2 feet from the door, this nun rips around the corner and starts walking fast down there to get me. So they put me in the bathroom, okay, thinking that they're gonna hide me. The nun came in. I want that boy out of the bathroom
I think I do
and out
remember
of here.
that.
And I got to see my dad for exactly a minute,
Yeah.
and he was on a bed that was a hump like
Yes.
this. And he was
Face
there for
down.
6 Yeah, it was horrible.
yeah.
But anyway, that's one of the stories at the hospital.
But I mean, I think it speaks to that generation how, your mother had that resolve
Yes.
and your father had that resolve.
Yes.
That, okay, we need to do something. We're not just going to depend on the
And there was 3 of us at that.
entitlements.
Yeah.
Only 3 of us.
Yeah.
Because Regina was born.
Yes, this happened up in Sheridan, yeah.
Do you remember anything from his military?
No, he never talked to me about any of the military, any of the wars, He must have talked mostly to my brother Emmett, but he didn't talk to me, that way. But I'm glad Emmett got those stories, and,
Yeah.
he'll never forget, and he'll always have it in his heart. But I'm learning from my brother.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, how does that make you feel?
It makes me so feel proud of my brother. I do, and my father, and everybody in the military. I mean, it's an awesome thing. We grew up that you respect it, and it hurts your feelings, like, in school. I mean, I worked in a school district, and and I just retired this year from it, so they took the Pledge of Allegiance out of the school. And we did have it for a few years when I first started, but a lot of the kids wouldn't stand, they wouldn't say it, and I thought, that's so hurtful. If they only realized that there's kids over there almost a few years younger than you fighting for you to act like this, it's a shame, not to respect them. But then eventually they just took it out of the school, and that I didn't like that. But yeah, we grew up respecting everybody, like Abby, and that's awesome to see these young girls go into stuff like that.
What's it like to be able to bring your daughters in?
It's awesome. I kept telling him on the phone, I talked to Emma, and he'd always tell me about it. And like I said, I sent the pictures, and then he sent me a book. And every time we talked, I'd ask him about the museum, and he'd tell me. I try to visualize it. But once you get here, and then I tell my daughters. So I even told him this morning, I said, that's I really wanted to see the museum because he talks so much about it, So I was so excited yesterday to come and see it, and now I have a visual of it. When he talks, now I can visualize exactly what he's saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and he put a lot of work into it. All of you did. And I'm glad to meet you, and, he talks about the guys. It's nice to know, now to have a face.
But to have that connection, had you guys ever seen his medals or anything like that before? You'd never seen his uniform? So talk about that. Talk about how it's first time for them to see the uniform.
They were impressed. They were mostly impressed with Abby's stuff, to see their cousins. That's something they'll never forget, I think it's just amazing. I love the whole thing. And he was telling me how it got started. He was talking to us. He gives us history lessons all the time, Ken, on this. So we're just listening, but you learn so much, and you could feel the passion in it, when he speaks.
Absolutely.
But he takes after my dad. He's a perfectionist. My dad was like that, and he looks like my father. He acts like my dad. So if you want to know my father, just look at Emmett, because he does. He acts like him. He has his ways,
Well, I remember that from yesterday. Y'all were looking at the pictures, and you're like,
Yes.
tell me about that.
Yes. That one picture, I said, Emmett, this looks exactly like you. And then my daughter spoke up and said, no, Mom, it looks like you. Granddad looks like you. But I see my father and my brother, Emmett. Yes.
Absolutely.
I mean, Emmett's taller, but same ways.
do you think you would have had a moment like that if we didn't get his stuff and put it out on display and show it to folks?
No, this is the best. I think this is awesome. I would never have had that. To actually come in and see it and the way everything's set up, I was just like, I'm impressed, very impressed of the way my brother did a lot here. I just love my brother Emmett, so.
I know. But other families, because, we have more folks in here, and what do you think for other families, like the video yesterday, Emmett was talking about how families entrust us with their heirlooms.
Yes, I can imagine how they'd feel coming in. I mean, it's got to fill their heart, to see it, to actually see it. You could hear about things, but when you come in and you see it, like, I'm sure my daughters were impressed with seeing the different uniforms, the different helmets, the different weapons. I mean, these young kids today, they don't realize back then, they have no clue really, Well, when you're older, you realize what was going on, Pearl Harbor, you hear about all that. And, they see the movie, but I mean, we actually, my mother and father would talk about it. Like, you hear it, you grew up with that kind of stuff. Like the Vietnam War, there was kids we went to school with that didn't come back home, And then, like Mikey Kopay, like he come back, he was never the same. Pizza, he passed away over there. Johnny passed him, wasn't it him? Yeah. And these guys, they never come back. I mean, they never come back. They never come back. It's awful.
Fortunate that your father.
They're making fun of me.
Oh, are they?
Yeah, they always do though. I don't know what I might have said something funny.
We had a lot of nicknames.
Well, I was getting.
Yeah, I'm talking pizza, like that was his nickname, Pizza. So it just come out of my mouth. Pizza.
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
I don't even know his real name.
Right, Pizza. That's how I knew him, and he never come home. And I was like, oh my God, I remember that. I remember my daughters getting the kick out of him.
Medal of Honor winner from the Keys Rock.
Who was it?
There's his picture in there.
Oh, okay.
Who was that? Who was?
John Pindner.
And I don't believe Johnny passed
He
and
was
come home either.
D-Day. He earned the
Yeah.
Medal of Honor at D-Day.
So I mean, you know these kids, and they were one of them was Emmett's best buddy, Mikey.
Well, he came back.
But he was never right.
For 3 weeks in country, he got hit.
Yeah, he was never right, Mikey. But he's such a good-looking kid, such a sweetheart.
Just one last question. Being able to come in yesterday, seeing your father, grandfather, everything, is this a moment that you're going to remember?
I'll remember this for the rest of my life. And I'm so happy I sent the pictures and Emmett blew them up and framed them. And it's just like, because they sat in my home, in my apartment. And I'm like, geez, when he asked, I was so excited. And I just took that evening looking through, getting them together. And my youngest daughter mailed them to him. And then you see them, And I asked Emmett, did you get the pictures? And he said, yes. And it's awesome. It's just nice that my father's memories are going to go on. If they're hanging here, they'll always go on. The memories are here for everybody and from everybody's family to come in and see, the different generations, the young kids growing up. This is your grandfather. That's amazing, especially if they're older and they could realize it, Yeah, my daughters at the age they can realize that's their grandfather. And Abby and Oliver, to see that.
Absolutely.
It's amazing, yes.
Yeah, perfect.